Hey, Wendy. Oh my goodness. It is so great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
You bet. So, for those of you that don't know Wendy, we would love for you to share a little bit about your story, about your background, your family.
Okay. My name is Wendy Smith, and I'm with Home of Guiding Hands currently. I've been with them for 28 years this month, long time with one company.
Hmm.
I've been doing life planning workshops with the company for 18 years, but my relationship with people with disabilities goes back much farther. I actually started volunteering in junior high in
Mm.
when we first had integration happening in the 70s,
Hmm.
and it became something that became a passion for me. I was in the track to become a teacher and actually was certified as a teacher, but always stayed connected to disability communities. And through college, I worked in respite programs and independent living programs. And then once I was in my teaching career, I was in a specialty that there just were not that many openings. And based on my experience, I found it much easier to start working with people with disabilities again. And ironically, my husband and I were both looking for positions at the same time and became live-in staff in a group home in New Jersey
That's
early in
amazing.
our marriage. And my oldest son, who does have disabilities, was actually born in that group home. And
Wow.
to talk about life really circling. I went from being a professional to all of a sudden being a parent with lived experience as well.
Mm.
And that has really informed my journey and my passion for advocacy and education and quality of life in services and care for people with disabilities.
Oh my goodness. That is such an amazing story.
Oh, definitely. We're talking today about future planning. Maybe for our families, could you define what future planning is and why it's so important, especially for families with special needs children?
I think every parent recognizes the need for future planning. Often parents start making arrangements as soon as they discover that they're pregnant. It's like, oh, we got to start the college account. Oh, we have to plan for, save for the wedding. And you start envisioning what that future is going to be. And sometimes it's dreams, and sometimes there are concrete steps that you're taking along that plan. The difference for families who have children with special needs is that there's a lot of unpredictability. We don't necessarily know what the progression is going to be. There are people that may never reach the level of independence that they're going to leave the care of their family. So the planning for their future is very different. There's not going to be that milestone of when they turn 18, when they graduate from college, my responsibility for their care is going to change or decrease or possibly end. That is never the expectation for a family who has a child with special needs. Their life planning becomes, how long can I continue this care? Who can I rely on for this care if something happens to me and I'm no longer able to provide it? What kinds of resources are going to be available to supplement my abilities long term? And how do I access them? How do I navigate the systems around them? There are just so many moving pieces and so many questions that families have, and often without a lot of direction. Even if they're connected to service systems, those tend to be very finite in their scope. And life planning involves every aspect of a person's abilities and needs. And it can be really, really challenging for families to feel confident that they really have all the information that they need and that they have the correct resources in place. And it can be tremendously emotionally charged to even consider life planning, because often it's not just what I'm planning for, it's what's going to happen when I'm no longer able to be part of that picture. And that emotion is just overwhelming often for families that are trying to do life planning with special needs involved.
No, that is so true. So true. I think that coming into this topic, it can be a lot of trepidation and a lot of, just fear in general over this topic because there is that reality of families realizing this is planning for when I'm no longer here and my child is not independent. And so what we've experienced as a family going through life planning programming um, is the relief that comes with that planning, right? And so,
Yeah.
but there is so much to it. So, can you share? what are the components that make up this comprehensive life plan that you would be looking at as a family?
I think the most important component in a life plan is really clarity. And that's so hard to get to. I think for many families, they approach planning in kind of a piecemeal I'm thinking about this topic. I had a question about that topic. Somebody was talking to me about this aspect. And the idea of being able to put it all in one comprehensive plan feels impossible. But when we step back and say, what are the non-negotiables in your child's life? What are the things that they attach the most importance to? What are the environments that make them feel calm and comfortable? What are the kinds of interactions that make them feel seen and heard and understood? Those become the foundation of that future plan, because those become the things that you want to make sure are always going to be available. I always want them to have the support of people who see and understand and recognize how to communicate with them. I always want them to have access to environments that are accessible and responsive. And, those become kind of your milestones around what you see as that positive future. And once you have the clarity of these are our non-negotiables, it becomes easier to document and clarify and share information about what kinds of services and supports would be necessary to make that future sustainable. And I have different questions that I'm going to ask from providers or programs based on those non-negotiables. So I feel a lot more confident that I'm going to be able to create the resources and supports because I have clarity about what I'm trying to achieve. And I think that's what often families are kind of given a template and they just start filling in the boxes, but they're not necessarily doing it with an objective of, I see what I'm trying to reach. And I think that's the missing link to the foundation of, I'm going to take some time and space and really think about if I could start from scratch and create the ideal world for my child to have the best possible quality of life. What would that look like? And then taking that idea of utopia and saying, okay, chances are I'm not going to get all of that, but let's see how close I can get. Maybe I can set up 95% success for that.
Mhm.
And that's still going to be a fantastic quality of life. And if I share that information, I have it documented and I communicate it and I talk to people honestly about it. And I build a team that are all working with me to make that reality. Then I have a plan that's sustainable. Then I have peace that even if something were to happen to me, I'm not the only one who knows this information. I'm not the only one who's advocating for my child.
I love
Yeah.
that team approach. And, you know, we took the life planning class that you actually lead, and we
Yes.
absolutely benefited from it.
Mhm.
And one of the things that stood out to me and is now being implemented is that team approach. And so when our daughter Abby was younger and we took the class, I did not have the clarity of where are we going with this. And so I can see that. I understand what you're saying there. Once you sort of have that long-term view on things and that overarching perspective, that team approach is everything, because getting a team around your child when you are gone that will take place, that will wrap around them in all those different components and those different areas of what are needed is it's just necessary, right? And it's just going to give us as families so much peace to know that's in place. And it may change over time, but those components are really important. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I was going to say that I think it's really important that families understand creating the team is beneficial in the long term because it does create that sustainability. But in the short term, it's also so beneficial to everybody involved in the family dynamic, because for parents who are having the conversations and talking to people about the role that they might take on, they get a chance to start practicing in that role,
Yeah.
which means that the parents have some backup and some support. So it alleviates stress in the present day. And it also affords the opportunity for people to really get a chance to test the waters. I know I've agreed to take on this role, but let me start practicing. If I'm going to be the one that has them coming to live with me in my home, and I'm really comfortable with the idea of saying they will always have a home with me. Let's go ahead and start some weekend visits. Let's have an overnight once a month and give the parents a little bit of a chance to have a break and give that person the chance to actually have that individual in their home with them and have it be not just for a 2-hour visit, not just for a family event, not just for a party, but a full 24, 48-hour period. So they can say, all right, I have some additional questions. And it opens the lines of communication and really makes sure that people are honestly on the same page. And it allows the opportunity for change. As you said, sometimes there are shifts. And often that comes from people having an opportunity to say, let me practice. Let me step into the shoes that I've said I will wear. And oh, they pinch a little bit more than I expected. Maybe I don't have the capacity to take on this role. Maybe I'm going to do a little bit of a different role. I'm still going to be involved, but maybe not to exactly the same degree. We only know that if we have a chance to practice. And I think that's the beauty of creating the team in the present and not waiting for it to be implemented when the family no longer has the capacity or the opportunity to make changes or provide information or do the training for those people that are going to step into those roles.
Mhm.
Such a good point.
Yeah, one of the things I heard too is as you're planning these and developing a plan and getting information about the your son or daughter is really understanding who they are and what their strengths are and building that plan around them to not just fill in blanks or check certain boxes, but try to give whoever is reading the document or whoever you're trying to give the information to an idea of who's their personality.
Oh,
We've done that, and I think you motivated that in that any caretaker we have, we have a all about Abby, our daughter, that really tells more than just clinical things, but more of a what's her personality. Get an idea of who she is before you actually meet her or working with her and so forth like that. So I really like how that plan kind of involves all those components and what is it that you really have a vision for them long term, where is their purpose and living their best life. So um as we're looking at the plan, kind of like I would imagine the diagnosis is probably a good starting point, as an age to start planning, but maybe how does that plan evolve over time and where are kind of some of the natural places we already mentioned, making adjustments, but as you're moving through in the planning process.
I honestly believe it's never too soon for families to start thinking about this. And there are obviously different stages where different levels of planning are possible. Somebody who is trying to plan a life plan for their child who's 3 years old, there's so much that's unknown. Their child is going to develop so much in their capacity to communicate, to navigate situations, to truly express their personality, that there would be a lot of need for revision and updating and kind of keeping up with that document. A pretty natural time for families to really focus on life planning and the big picture pieces tend to be around high school age, because often school systems are asking families to make decisions that have a direct impact on that long-term situation. Are they going to have a diploma? Are they going to be certificate bound? What are they interested in? Often high schools will have a transition program where they have opportunities to practice different vocational opportunities. And so much of that is at the behest of parents, and they're being asked to make so many decisions about what can they participate in, what activities can they go to, what kinds of things are you authorizing to happen in the community. And for families that haven't had a chance to consider those big picture questions, it can feel very overwhelming and it feels very kind of crisis driven. I have until the end of the week to figure this out. And my goal would be for families to have the space and the opportunity to take time and really process and consider what they know about their child. We are all experts in our own children.
That's right.
And we rely on professionals, we rely on systems, we rely on services, but at the end of the day, we direct those services based on the information that we share with them. We identify, these are the situations that might be challenging for my child, and this is how we navigate it. These are the supports that we put in place. This is the preparation that we have. These are the conversations that we have before we begin specific activities. So families are always gathering information. They're always creating the tools and the pieces of the plan. Actually putting it on paper and sharing it with people becomes kind of the sticking point. And there's something about documenting it that makes it feel real and final. And that's often where the emotion becomes a barrier.
Mm,
That, it took, you made reference to the life planning workshop series that I offer. I've
yes.
been doing that for 18 years, and we are vendored by San Diego Regional Center. We're in the process of looking to be vendored with other regional centers throughout California. We accept private pay for people that are not in the California system, but it took us almost 3 years to be vendored by San Diego Regional Center because their response was that service coordinators are supposed to be doing long-term planning with families.
Yeah.
And it is part of it's part of the job description that they are supposed to have conversations with families and make sure that resources are in place. But for most families, their relationship with their service coordinator is very surface. They see this person maybe once a year, or they call them if there's a crisis, but the conversation is usually about the goals that have been set and are they reaching their milestones. And then at the end of the meeting, the service coordinator might say something like, have you thought about what would happen? And immediately the parent is overwhelmed with the emotion around that, the fear and the anxiety and the grief that comes to surface, and they're in tears, and that's the end of the conversation. So it's really not something that service coordinators have the capacity to help families navigate. And that's why it's so important for families to have the opportunity to begin planning in a time that they're not dealing with a crisis, when they're
Right.
not feeling overwhelmed with deadlines and decisions, that they have the space to process those emotions. I was actually just in a conversation with a parent today who said, as we started our conversation, she was already reaching for the tissue. She was in tears
Mm,
because it's a very emotionally charged thing to think about change in your child's life, particularly if you have been their primary caregiver, you are the expert in them, you are their sole, it feels like you are their sole advocate. And the idea of giving that role to someone else is very painful.
yeah.
It's a necessary thing. All of us are going to face a time when we are no longer going to be around.
Hmm.
It's the human condition. There is an end point. We don't know when it's going to be. And there's a lot of emotion around the idea that my role is going to change. And because I'm a parent who loves my child, there's never going to be a good time for me to consider that. If I'm waiting for it to feel easy, if I'm waiting for it to not bring up emotion, I'm never going to reach that point. So I think it's very important that families recognize that I have to just sit in the emotion and breathe through it and not let it be a barrier to having the conversation, to making the note, to scheduling the meeting and taking that next action step, knowing that the emotion is real and it's not going to be easy. I might have the conversation, then hang up and sob for 3 hours,
Yeah.
but I had the conversation and I did it because I do love my child and I am advocating and I want to make sure that what they need long term is going to be available to them, even if I'm not the one providing it.
Yeah. Well, Wendy, we really appreciate the sympathy, the empathy that you tackle this topic with, because you are a parent, so you do understand.
Yes.
And there are so many, again, different components to this big plan. Um, how does, in particular, government programs come into play as you're looking at the future planning? What would you say to that?
I say it is absolutely a major consideration
Mm,
in many ways. The services that are available, depending on where people live and have access to services, the systems can be really specific about qualifiers and guidelines. For many individuals with disabilities, they rely on needs-based public benefits like Social Security and public benefit systems for healthcare, Medicaid. For California, it's Medi-Cal or Medicaid if they have that eligibility. But there are guidelines for those programs that dictate how families can provide financial stability. I can't just put aside a savings account for my child because that would make them ineligible for some of those needs-based benefits. I don't want them to spend everything that I've saved for their benefit on their housing. I want them to be able to have that from their public benefits and
Mhm.
have the money that I've set aside for them enhance their quality of life. So I'm going to possibly think about a special needs trust or an ABLE account as a vehicle to make sure that they remain eligible for those public benefits, but still have the funds to enhance those services, because public benefits are pretty minimal. They meet the necessities, but they don't do a lot above that. And when we're talking about a comprehensive plan for the ideal quality of life, that means planning for the funding of the extras that are not going to come with those needs-based benefits. But I want to be aware of what the guidelines are for those so that I can make them part of the plan and supplement them, as opposed to try and do it all on our own or rely only on those benefits. They
Mm.
Right.
definitely have a role and we need to factor that in, but it's just one piece of the big plan puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that you already kind of mentioned some of the financial aspects. And whenever you talk about government entitlement programs, and then also, how are the parents going to help support, it becomes an issue that is, it's hard to navigate. You mentioned something briefly about a special needs trust. Maybe you can go into a little bit more detail with that as well. I know there's other legal kind of things that you may consider as they turn 18, such as conservatorship. And so maybe a couple things talking about this, like if you could address the financial or the special needs trust, but also when might you hire somebody like a professional attorney to help you navigate some of these?
Well, you mentioned the age of 18, and it is a big milestone for people with disabilities because regardless of their diagnosis, regardless of their ability or challenge, they legally become an adult when they turn 18. And based on their capacity, families have to make the decision about how they are going to support authority, have authority to make decisions and support decision making for that individual. There are new laws in place in California in particular that are impacting the idea of conservatorship. In California, we have limited conservatorship for people with developmental disabilities. And there are new laws in place that now require that the legal system, when a family is filing a petition to become a limited conservatorship, become a limited conservator, that they are asked what less restrictive attempts they have made to support that individual with their decision making, because it's not something that they want to make easy for families to just say, oh, they're 18 and I'm going to lose my authority, so I'm going to file for conservatorship. That it's a kind of knee jerk. They turn 18. I want to be able to continue to make decisions on their behalf, so I'm just going to do this. The idea is that people don't necessarily understand the impact that it is a legal process that basically identifies this person as incapable. They don't have the capacity to act in their own best interest. And we are going to take away their legal right to make decisions and give it to someone else. If there is a less restrictive way to support the individual in making decisions in their best interest and they can safely do that, we want to explore those possibilities. So currently, programs are being developed to assist families to set up services like supported decision making, where the individual has people that they trust and have confidence in, they can take decisions to and help kind of navigate what would be the pros and cons of the different choices without taking away their ability to actually make that decision. So for people that don't have the capacity, limited conservatorship is absolutely still an option, but we are always expanding and there are always the development of new services. And it's important that families stay aware of those changes to laws, to expectations, to services. And that's one of the things that I do talk about in the life planning workshops. We don't know what's going to change in the next 10, 15, 20 years. There are going to be different legal expectations. There are going to be different services. There are going to be people that, we thought were going to be providers forever that have gone out of business, and we're going to have to make decisions. But if we have that foundation of like, these are our non-negotiables, it becomes easier to figure out what those are, even in the area of planning for finances. You mentioned specifically special needs trusts. There are two basic vehicles to protect assets for an individual. One is a special needs trust and one is an ABLE account. Both of them allow a person to remain eligible for needs-based benefits and still have funds available to their benefit to supplement that. The difference between an ABLE account and a special needs trust is the access. A special needs trust is never available to the actual person. It is for their benefit, but it is not their asset. They cannot make requests. They cannot make withdrawals. They cannot have direct access to any of the funds in a special needs trust. Someone is always making those purchases on their behalf in their best interest. An ABLE account can also have donations from family members and other people, but the person with a disability can also do their own savings. They can make their own contributions, and they have access in ways that they can make transfers from their ABLE account to a checking account to pay for some of their bills. They can use a debit card to make some purchases. So depending on the capacity of the individual, often a combination is a good idea. So the family has some large lump sums for the big long-term ticket items, but the individual has the capacity to do savings for, shorter term goals. I want to have a new bedroom set, so I'm going to set aside $50 of what I earn in my part-time job every month, and in a couple of years, I'm going to buy myself a brand new bedroom suit. And they have the joy of reaching that goal, of setting something that they want to work toward and budgeting for it and working toward it and doing it themselves. And that sense of self-esteem is something that we want to support.
Yeah.
So all of these decisions around the legal issues of authority making and decision making and savings and finances there's just such a breadth to the possibilities. And it really does come back to that examination of what is my child's true capacity, what is their interest, because they might have the capacity to do the math and do their budgeting and their savings, but they have no interest. Like, mom takes care of that. Mom buys everything that I need. I just tell mom that I want a new DVD, and that's the end of it. If they're not interested, it may not be something that the family pursues. It all comes back to knowing the individual and having a really clear idea of what is our capacity, what are our resources, and what seems like the best fit for us to really give our children that enhanced quality of life that we're hoping for them to experience throughout their lifespan.
Right. Again, it just comes back to, as you said, that quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this, and that was a great idea with the kind of the legal aspect, financial aspect. As you're putting an entire comprehensive plan together, how would you make sure that you include the components like medical, educational, even as they're outside the system, as they graduate out of the system, the education's still a part of that, and the social aspects for the future. So how would you, help guide our families, I suppose, to make sure all those components are a part of their plan?
Well, there are a lot of documents available. With my life planning workshop series, I actually provide a template for families that they have a chance to navigate and fill in information. It is so comprehensive that often there are gaps in it because there are pieces that don't necessarily apply to every family. We really tried to develop a tool that addressed every possible aspect of a person's life, from the financial, from their doctors, from their medical history, from their social connections, from the environments that are comfortable for them, from the celebrations that they attach importance to, their communication skills, their needs for support, the things that can be stumbling blocks for them, that certain kinds of interactions might be triggering for them.
Yeah.
All of
Important to
these
note.
details, it's important that that information has a place to live. And if we can have a tool that allows it to all be in one place, it allows any caregiver to find what they need within that document. For families that just don't have the opportunity or the capacity, there are many online tools, there are online trainings available, and some of them have very similar sections and guidelines. I've reviewed many of them, and they're very similar. I think we all recognize that a good tool to share information is comprehensive and considers not just one aspect, not just their education, not just their communication ability, not just their need for physical support, but the entire person, their personality, the things that they are passionate about, their hobbies, their interests, and beyond just documenting it, it gives the resources for people to build upon those interests and those skills and those abilities, as opposed to just, oh, I got this paperwork and it says that they have this diagnosis and they have these needs and these are their challenges. A comprehensive plan, a comprehensive document is going to say, yes, these are the challenges, this is the diagnosis, but here is everything about the person.
Yeah.
This is their spirit, this is their sense of humor, this is their, just joy that they spread by a smile.
Yeah. Uh, so good to keep in mind as families, as parents, handling such a delicate topic, as an emotionally charged topic, like you said, I'm just sitting here thinking, for those that have not looked at future planning, that are coming into this podcast episode and listening in. By the way, we have other episodes specifically geared towards special needs trusts, CalAble accounts, SSI supports, all the things. So go back and listen to those as well. But Wendy, what would you say, when you run your class, when you run your
Mhm.
program, what are the main topics that these families are going to come up against? We've talked about multiples of them, but sort of what's like the five main areas that families are going to be looking at when they're thinking future planning, and keeping in mind the whole picture, their child's whole personality and their likes and their dislikes. But it's, like the government, the medical, the future
Yeah,
living, residential, that sort of thing.
we I break my life planning workshop into 5 main topics.
Okay.
And the first thing that has to be addressed, I think, for every parent is the emotion.
Yeah.
The, if you don't deal with the emotion, it becomes the barrier that you can never move past. If you get stuck every time you start to think about future planning and it brings you to tears and you stop because you're in tears, it's not anything you're ever going to move past.
Mm.
So we deal with the emotion first. That's primary. And if we cry, but we keep writing and we keep talking and we move through the emotion. And once we have recognized that it doesn't have to stop me from moving forward, I can still feel the emotion. It's still very real, but it doesn't have to be a barrier.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
doing this with other people and there's some support going on here. I can move past the emotion. Once we get past the emotion, I think one thing that families really don't do enough of is a true evaluation of their child's capacity and their ability. So many of our services, so many of our systems are still in that medical based, what is the diagnosis? What is the challenge? What is the problem? Let's try and fix it. Let's try and solve it. And for a true quality of life, we want it to be based on not the things that are wrong with you, but the things that you enjoy, the things that we want to celebrate about you, the things that you have capacity. If you have an interest, let's capitalize on that. Can we turn that into a career for you?
That's
If you
right.
have a skill set, can we use that to help you build community and make new connections and find people that really see you past the label of your disability? That's what we want to have be our second step. And once we have that idea of who this person really is and what a good quality of life means to them, then we can expand it out and start talking about how do we build community? How do we make connections? How do we get resources in place? And then, obviously, long term, we want to consider, where do they want to be? Do they want to continue in the family home? Are they looking around and saying, all of my brothers and sisters have moved out? When is it going to be my turn
Mm.
to have my own space? This is part of recognizing what that individual really is all about. Do they see themselves as capable? And I want to have my own place. I want to be in charge of my own life. I want to make my own friends. I want to earn my own money. This is important to me. The family needs to have the information to be able to support that. And then being able to tie it up and make sure that the legal supports are there, that we have the funds to have them be able to access the resources and supports and activities that they want to do. We want to make sure that the funds are available for that. If they struggle with decision making, we want to make sure that they have the supports either as a limited conservator or through a supported decision-making team or through a power of attorney that they might sign to be able to know that they have the resources to safely navigate changes that might come up in their life. So those are the five main categories that we talk about, and in and woven in and around them are all of the considerations as far as for our family. What are the resources? What are the in my life planning workshops, there's no grouping of people by age or diagnosis or ability. I can have wildly diverse groups of parents. What unifies them is that they care about their children and they're concerned about what the future is going to bring.
Yes.
So every plan is very unique, but it always should very honestly focus on this individual and what is really their best aspect and how can we take advantage of that to help them build the best possible life.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that one that they would love,
Mhm.
right? One that
Yeah.
they've chosen. I love that.
Yeah.
I really like again, coming back to that team aspect of everything and making sure that, especially as the parents grow older, there's a team around for the decision making. One of the aspects we've kind of just hinted at, but not said, and so maybe we can address specifically is how do you involve siblings in this whole process in first the decision making potentially, and then also the taking over long term potentially. And especially, I would say, if the siblings are younger than, say, their sibling that has a disability.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic because often there are siblings involved. And when I have families in the life planning, we start talking about it, there are parents who kind of just have the unspoken expectation that this is your sibling and you are going to be responsible for them, whether you want it or not. And
Mm.
we have other families and parents are like, I don't want to burden them. They say they're willing, they want to. I would rather have them not have that responsibility. And we have everything in between. I think there are conversations that need to be had. And it's really important for everybody to be on the same page. And those conversations can't just happen once. If, a sibling can say at 14 with all sincerity, I will always be there to care for my brother. But 20 years later, when they're 34 and married and in a career with their own children, living 5 states away, that's going to look different. They cannot necessarily just say to their spouse, guess what? My brother's moving in next week because I promised when I was 14.
Right.
It has to be an ongoing conversation. I think at its foundation, any sibling should have the expectation that they're going to be a sibling, that they're going to know where their brother or their sister is, that they're going to be an advocate, that they're going to speak out on their behalf, should that be necessary. And then based on the ongoing conversations and the development of the team, the family can go into more detail and speak about what is your comfort in your role as an advocate. Would you want to be legally an advocate as a co-conservator if we have limited conservatorship? Would you be comfortable leading the supportive decision-making team, that you would be the one that would coordinate the meetings, make sure that the specialists are available and, kind of make sure that those are happening on a regular basis. So your sibling always has the people there to listen when they're trying to struggle through a decision that needs to be made. Do you see yourself as kind of stepping into the, what do I call it? Kind of the oversight role,
Yeah.
that we're going to be using services because we feel that that's going to be in your brother or sister's best interest, but somebody has to keep an eye on those providers. Somebody has to ask the questions. Somebody has to make the unannounced visit and just keep eyeballs on and make sure that things are going well. That's part of the role of an advocate. And the conversations around that are going to be unique to every family and every sibling dynamic. There are growing groups of SIBs and support groups for siblings to kind of have support and other siblings to have conversations around. There are some real strong emotions, depending on the dynamic of the family, how many children are involved, where, if the person with a disability is the oldest, if they're the youngest, if they're somewhere in the middle, how that impacted their siblings. That, I grew up and this was just always part of my life. And we never had friends over because my brother just couldn't tolerate it, or everything changed when I was 12 and my brother with a disability was born. And all of a sudden I was in the back seat and as a teenager, that was really challenging for me. If those strong emotions from childhood are going to have an impact, it needs to be part of the conversation.
Mm,
And so often there is, it's glossed over. It's just kind of the unspoken expectation, and it needs to be spoken, and it needs to be part of the conversation. And emotions need to be validated. That if this is something that you're going to do with resentment because you've had resentment since you were a teenager, I would rather have a professional in the role and let you off the hook and let you be just a sibling,
mhm.
just someone who, is there for the holidays and makes it special and loves your brother as your brother, and not as somebody that is your responsibility, and not someone that you have to deal with. You
Mhm.
know, we want to make sure that we are sensitive to the relationship over and above the responsibility.
Absolutely.
One just quick question. You mentioned it as you're talking about, grief, emotion, working through all this. How often have you been able to encourage your families to, seek counseling, to be able to, have an outside person that helps work you through those emotions? Because when you become on that healthier ground, then making some of these decisions is a much easier thing to do.
Yeah. It's not something that's readily available for
Mm,
families. I think for parents, there is counseling available. For siblings, there's some counseling and services available. For people with disabilities, it is very challenging to find providers that have experience and know how to navigate their perspectives, their compromised communication systems, their unique understanding of what's going on around them and how they process that. Um, there are programs being developed, and it's not something that we do a lot of discussion about, but certainly it's important that families feel comfortable accessing counseling as a resource when they are dealing with these strong emotions. I certainly, I'm not a counselor. I don't have a counseling background, but I do my best to validate for families that their emotions are real and they are perfectly, honestly, legitimate responses to the circumstances of their life. And you can say, I, I have this conversation during the life planning workshops where there are people that are just not going to get it. The people that should all over you is the phrase that I use
mhm,
when you're talking about a situation. I'm like, you know what you should do?
mhm.
They have not lived my life. They have not had my experiences. They don't have the context to give me that advice. So
Mm,
they're not somebody that I'm going to listen to. I'm going to reach out to people who have similar backgrounds and have a true understanding. This is where parent support groups, I think, are so valuable, because there are not that many rooms that you can go into and honestly share your emotions around what happened last night at the dinner table. You
Yes.
know, there are so many things that we feel need to be filtered for the general public. And I think that strengthens the emotions when we keep them boxed up and we don't feel like we have a safe outlet for them. So I do feel very strongly that counseling, when you are living in that emotion and it can't be boxed anymore, you need to have a safe outlet for it. You need to have a safe way to process it, whether that's with trusted family members and friends or through a professional. I do think that it's important that families feel supported in being honest about what they really are dealing with, because it's a very emotional situation.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Wendy, we've talked about it here and there throughout the conversation, but we want to make sure those of our listeners that are in the San Diego area know what it is you do. What is this class that you provide, this program?
So we are vendored with San Diego Regional Center to provide a life planning workshop series. Um, our website is www.lifeplanninghelp.org. And on that website, I have links for registration for upcoming classes. This is now my full-time job. I offer 16 groups a year, 4 at a time. We have groups that are starting in July, in September, in January, and in April every year. And we offer a variety of schedules. Most of them are in the evening because we're very sensitive to the fact that people are working. There is one during the day for the people who are like, oh, my kid's at school, I have time to do it. But we do these virtually So people don't have to worry about childcare. They don't have to worry about a commute. It also allows us to have families participate that are not just in the San Diego area. We are, as I mentioned, looking to expand and get vendored with other regional centers, and we do accept private pay from people that are in other states. I've done life planning with military families that didn't know where they were going to be stationed next year. And
Mm,
it was critical for those parents to understand, as long as I know my non-negotiables, I know how to advocate and ask for the services wherever we happen to land.
yes. So good. So good. Thank you for sharing. For those of you that want to reach out, we'll have all of that contact information in the show notes. But Wendy, we just want to ask you, there's one last question we always like to ask our guests, which is, what would you share with our listeners to help bring hope for their road ahead?
Okay. I actually wrote something for this one.
Oh, I
I'm
love
gonna
it.
I'm gonna read it. Because sometimes I don't remember what I've said or how I've said it, but I want to
You
make sure
bet.
that I do this correctly. Um, what I would want to share with those listeners is that there can be peace of mind. Having clarity about the essentials for success means being confident about asking the right questions, selecting the right services, moving in the right direction, even around detours. But peace of mind is possible when you have that clarity.
Mm,
That's
love it.
great.
Wendy, thank you so much.
Hmm.
It was personally a blessing to us. And we wanted to bring this topic to light because future planning is so important for our families. And so thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for sharing about your own story. And thank you for coming on and chatting with us about this very important topic for our
Thank you
families.
so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime. All right. Thank you so much.